This is the story of a man who had everything a billion-dollar company, a beautiful wife, and the arrogance to believe he deserved it all. His name was Julian Clare, and he made the fatal mistake of confusing loyalty for weakness. He thought his wife Leora was just another one of his pristine possessions, something to be polished, displayed, and then ignored. He was wrong. In front of his mistress, in a room full of powerful men, he chose to humiliate her. But he forgot one crucial detail in the world of high-stakes business: the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. What he saw as a trophy wife was, in reality, a queen waiting for her moment to checkmate the king. The chandeliers at the Metropolitan Museum of Art dripped crystals, each one reflecting the cold, precise glitter of the New York high society gathered beneath. This was Leora Clare's world, or so everyone thought. Tonight was the annual Clare Sterling Foundation Gala, the jewel in New York's philanthropic crown, and Leora was its architect. She moved through the crowd in a sapphire silk gown, a flawless smile affixed to her face. She wasn't a guest. She was the silent stage manager. "Leora, darling," chirped Cynthia Blackwood, a woman whose face was a testament to the finest surgeons in Manhattan. "The hydrangeas are divine. You've outdone yourself. Julian must be so proud." "Thank you, Cynthia. I'm glad you're enjoying it," Leora replied, her voice a calm, modulated contralto. She'd spent 3 weeks negotiating with the Dutch floral supplier, shaving 18% off the initial quote, a detail she'd never share. Her husband, Julian Clare, CEO of Clare Sterling Industries, was holding court by the Rousseau exhibit. He was a man carved from entitlement, with a Roman nose hair swept back in a way that screamed old money, and a charisma that was as potent as it was predatory. He hadn't seen Leora all night, save for the requisite photo op at the entrance. He was too busy laughing a deep booming sound with a woman Leora didn't recognize at first. The woman was striking not in the classic, understated way of Leora's set, but in a sharp, modern, almost aggressive way. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her, and her dark hair was cut in a severe, fashionable bob. This was Chloe Morgan Julian's new miracle VP of marketing, recruited from a tech startup. Leora had met her twice. Both times Ms. Morgan had looked straight through her. Julian caught Leora's eye across the room. He didn't smile. He gave a small, impatient jerk of his head. "Come here." It was a summons, not an invitation. Leora gracefully excused herself from Cynthia Blackwood and crossed the floor. The conversations around her were a low hum, but as she approached, Julian's voice cut through. "And that's the problem with this city," Julian was saying to a small group of investors. "All legacy, no vision. Chloe here, she's the vision. She's dragging this old dinosaur," he slapped the Clare Sterling logo on a nearby banner, "into the 21st century. Chloe Morgan smiled, a predatory flash of white. "I just followed Julian's lead. He's the real visionary." Leora arrived at the circle. "Julian," she said softly, "Mr. Peterson was asking about the endowment figures." Julian turned, his smile tightening. "Leora, there you are. Stop fussing over the numbers, darling. We have accountants for that." He turned back to the group, placing a proprietary hand on the small of Chloe's back. "As I was saying, the Astra project is going to revolutionize." He didn't introduce her. He didn't acknowledge her. He had simply absorbed her into his orbit and then dismissed her presence. Chloe's eyes flickered to Leora, a tiny triumphant smirk playing on her lips, before she masked it with professionalism. Leora felt the familiar cold knot tighten in her stomach. She was Mrs. Clare, the perfect hostess, the silent partner, the architect of his perfect life, and increasingly a ghost in her own home. Later, in the back of their black Bentley, the silence was heavy. Julian was scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the screen. The gala was a success, Leora said, more to break the silence than to seek approval. We're projected to exceed the endowment goal by 12%. Julian grunted. Good. Julian. She said, a slight tremor she hated entering her voice. That woman. Chloe Morgan. What about her? She's a killer, a shark, exactly what this company needs. The way you were, familiar, at the gala. It was... Julian finally looked up from his phone, his eyes flat and cold. It was what Leora business is, that what you're asking? Or are you insinuating something? I'm just saying it was unprofessional, for both of you. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Unprofessional. You are going to lecture me on professionalism. You who hasn't worked a real job in her life. You who spends my money on flowers and canapes. That spending just raised $3 million for children's literacy, Leora said, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Oh, don't play the martyr. It's not becoming, Julian snapped. He put the glass partition up between them and the driver, a gesture of finality. Your job, Leora, is to be supportive, to look good on my arm, to run my house. It's a simple arrangement. Don't complicate it. Leora turned her head and watched the blurred lights of New York City streak past the window. She had married Julian Clare a decade ago, a bright-eyed, ambitious MBA graduate herself. She had met him at Wharton. He was the legacy, she was the brains. She had loved him, she thought. But Julian's father, the formidable Harrison Clare, had made one condition for Julian to take over the company. Marry that girl. She's got a spine. You'll need it. Julian had agreed, and for the first year they were a team. She had ideas. She had strategies. But Julian, insecure and threatened by her intelligence, had systematically, gently and lovingly pushed her out. You don't need to worry your pretty head about this, he'd say. I need you at home. I need you to be my rock. Slowly, his rock had become his pedestal, and then his doormat. Harrison Clare had died 5 years ago. On his deathbed, he had gripped Leora's hand, his eyes desperate. Don't let him ruin it, Leora. The company, it's my life's work. He's weak. Leora had nodded, thinking he meant his son's soul. She was beginning to realize he had meant his business acumen. When they arrived at their sterile, multi-million-dollar penthouse on Park Avenue, Julian went straight to his study. I have a call, he said over his shoulder. Leora stood in the vast marble foyer. She knew he wasn't taking a call. She could smell it. The faint, alien scent of Chloe Morgan's perfume, Santal 33, clinging to his suit jacket. She walked to her own study, a room Julian never entered, dismissing it as her hobby room. It was simple, elegant, and severe. She sat at her desk, turned on her computer, and opened a file. It wasn't a scrapbook or a shopping list. It was a complex, multi-layered spreadsheet linked to back-end market data and internal performance metrics. Leora Clare held a non-executive seat on the board of Clare Sterling Industries. Julian had insisted on it to keep her involved. He thought it was a joke, a token position. He sent her the same sanitized, glossy reports the public shareholders got. He had no idea that Leora had been using her old Wharton credentials to access deep analytics. He didn't know she was tracking the company's performance decline, a slow, steady bleed that had started the day Julian signed off on the Astra project, a disastrous high-risk tech acquisition that Chloe Morgan had championed. He saw a party planner. He saw a trophy. He had no idea he was living with a forensic accountant. And she had just found the first thread of unraveling, a series of consulting fees paid to a shell corporation in Delaware an LLC she'd never heard of. The payments were authorized by two people, Julian Clare and Chloe Morgan. Leora looked at the name of the LLC JCM Ventures. Julian, Chloe, Morgan. The knot in her stomach turned to ice. It wasn't just an affair. It was embezzlement. He wasn't just destroying their marriage. He was destroying his father's company. And the words of Harrison Clare echoed in her ear. Don't let him ruin it. I won't, Harrison, she whispered to the empty room. I promise. The next board meeting was 2 weeks later, in the cavernous oak-panelled room on the 50th floor that Harrison Clare had built to intimidate. A massive oil-painted portrait of the founder loomed over the 30-foot table, his gaze stern and disapproving. Leora entered as always 5 minutes early. She wore a modest grey cashmere dress. She was the only woman on the board save for a 70-year-old sterling family heir who lived in Florida and always video-conferenced in. The other members, all men in their late 60s, nodded at her. Leora, lovely to see you. They treated her like a delicate niece, not a director. Julian bustled in, followed by Chloe Morgan. Ms. Morgan, you're not a board member, said Arthur Pennington, the company's oldest director and Harrison's best friend. Arthur was a stickler for protocol, a man of quiet integrity who wore the same style of bow tie he had since the 1960s. Chloe is here to present the Astra projections, Arthur, Julian said, dismissively taking his seat at the head of the table. She's the only one who understands the damn thing. Try to keep up. Chloe set up her laptop, her movements swift and confident. She avoided Leora's gaze. For the next hour, Chloe presented a dazzling series of slides filled with buzzwords: synergy, disruption, market penetration, proactive growth. The numbers were glowing, but Leora knew they were fantasy. They were based on market assumptions that had no basis in reality. And so, Chloe concluded, we project that with an additional $50 million in liquid capital, we can fast-track the Astra rollout and capture 30% of the market by Q4. Julian beamed. See, brilliant. Arthur Pennington peered over his spectacles. Ms. Morgan, your projections are optimistic. They don't seem to account for the new federal regulations on data privacy, which directly impact the Astra platform. We believe the regulatory headwinds are overstated, Mr. Pennington, Chloe said smoothly. Our legal team is handling it. Your legal team is a 28-year-old in-house counsel, Arthur grumbled. Now this request for $50 million, that's a significant draw on our liquid reserves. You have to spend money to make money, Arthur. Julian cut in, annoyed. We're not running a savings and loan. We're building an empire. Leora sat, as she always did, with her hands folded, her notepad in front of her. She hadn't said a word. Julian, in a fit of paternalistic condescension, sent her a text message during the meeting. Dry cleaning. Don't forget. 5 p.m. Leora's pen stopped moving. She looked at the message. Then she looked up, her gaze sweeping across the room. She saw the yes men Julian had installed. She saw the two directors who were clearly on Chloe's payroll, and she saw Arthur Pennington looking tired and defeated. When the presentation finished, Julian said, all in favor of the $50 million allocation. Hands went up. The motion passed 8-2. Arthur and the Florida heiress were the only nays. Excellent, Julian said, clapping his hands. Meeting adjourned. Chloe, my office. The men filed out, patting Julian on the back. Leora remained seated, slowly packing her leather-bound notebook. Arthur Pennington paused by her chair. He's going to drive this company into the ground. Arthur whispered, his voice heavy. Leora looked up at him. Her eyes were not sad or angry. They were clear. Yes, he is. Harrison, he must be spinning in his grave. He's not, Leora said, her voice so low Arthur had to lean in. He's watching. Arthur looked at her. truly looked at her for the first time. He didn't see the quiet wife. He saw the sharp, analytical mind his old friend Harrison had so often praised. "What did you mean by that?" Arthur asked. Leora closed her briefcase. "Julian thinks his father left him a company. He didn't. He left him a test. And Julian is failing." She stood up. "Mr. Pennington." "Arthur. May I call you that?" "Please, dear. I know about JCM Ventures. I know about the Astra platform's unfixable security flaw, and I know that the $50 million you just allocated isn't for fast tracking. It's to cover the losses from the Delaware account." Arthur Pennington's face went white as parchment. How could you possibly?" "I do my reading," Leora said simply, "while Julian is distracted." She started to walk out of the boardroom. Arthur hurried after her. "Leora, wait. If you know this, you must do something. You must go to the press. To the SEC. Leora stopped at the elevator bay, her back to him. "The press will create a panic and destroy the stock. The SEC will launch an investigation that will tie the company in knots for years, allowing our competitors to gut us. Julian and Chloe will be ruined, yes, but so will Claire Sterling. So will the 10,000 employees who work for us. So will your pension, Arthur." She turned to face him. "This isn't about revenge. This is about a promise. I made a promise to Harrison that I would not let his legacy be ruined." "But what can we do?" Arthur pleaded. "He controls the board. He's the CEO." "He's not the only one with power," Leora said. "He's just the only one who likes to be loud about it." She pressed the down button. "Arthur, do you remember the founder's fail-safe clause, Article 7, Section 4 of the bylaws?" Arthur's eyes widened. "The Doomsday Clause. Harrison wrote that in 1985. It's archaic. It's designed to remove a CEO for moral turpitude or gross negligence. It's impossible to invoke. It requires a 2/3 shareholder vote and a unanimous decision from the non-executive directors." It's not impossible," Leora interrupted. "It's just difficult. Harrison wrote it for a reason. He wrote it for Julian." The elevator dinged. "Leora," Arthur said, his voice shaking with a new terrifying hope. "What are you planning?" "I'm not planning anything," Leora said, stepping into the elevator. "I'm just a quiet shareholder doing my homework." The doors slid shut, leaving Arthur Pennington alone in the hallway, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across his face. For the next 4 weeks, Leora became a phantom. She still ran the house. She still planned the dinners. But she was also in contact with a private investigator, a forensic accounting firm, and most importantly, the Sterling family heirs in Boston. She wasn't just a Kensington by birth. She was a Kensington of the Boston Kensingtons, a quiet academic family with deep ties to the law. Her father was one of the most respected and feared corporate lawyers in New England. She had downplayed her connections, her own brilliance, to fit into Julian's world. No more. She flew to Boston on a Tuesday, telling Julian she was visiting a sick aunt. She met the Sterling family, 2 brothers and a sister, all in their 70s, in a stuffy law office. "Leora, we've always been fond of you," said the eldest, Thomas Sterling. "But what you're alleging, it's a coup. You're his wife." "Which is why I'm the only one who could see it," Leora said, opening her briefcase. She didn't bring emotion. She brought evidence. "Here are the P&L reports Julian filed full of projected income. And here," she slid a second folder across the table, "are the real balance sheets showing a $90 million debt hole. Here are the wire transfers to JCM Ventures. And here," she placed a small USB drive on the table, "is a 45-second audio file from last night of Julian on the phone with Chloe laughing about how they're going to fleece the old goats. That's you, by diluting your shares to fund their next project. Thomas Sterling's face turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple. He's leveraging the company's pension fund to cover their losses, Leora said, her voice cutting through the silence. He's not just a fool or an adulterer. He's a criminal, and he's about to take all of us down with him. What do you propose? Thomas asked, his voice now steel. The annual board dinner is next Thursday. The vote is on Friday. He's expecting a coronation. He's planning to ask for another 100 million instead. Leora said, We're going to invoke Article 7. I have Arthur Pennington. I need you. The Sterling family shares, combined with mine and Arthur's, it's 48%. We just need a few more. And who replaces him? We'll need an interim CEO, Leora said. Someone who understands the books, has the trust of the family, and can clean this up without a media circus. Thomas Sterling looked at her, the realization dawning. You. I didn't say that, Leora said. You didn't have to, Thomas replied. Harrison always did say, you were the only one with any sense in that family. The restaurant was L'Orangerie, a place so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a discreet gold plaque. It was Julian's favorite spot, a dark, wood-paneled room where captains of industry and their much younger second wives ate 300-a-plate dinners. This was the annual board dinner, a tradition Julian's father had started. It was meant to be a relaxed evening of camaraderie before the official vote the next day. This year, Julian had made a change. He had invited Chloe Morgan. Leora sat at the long table, a vision in pale grey silk, a stark contrast to Chloe's vibrant, plunging red. Chloe was seated next to Julian, in the spot traditionally reserved for the CEO's wife. Leora was seated further down between Arthur Pennington and a sycophantic director named Mark Jennings. The tension was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. Julian was drunk, not just on the 1982 Bordeaux, but on his own perceived power. He had spent the last week whipping votes, as he called it, promising bonuses and new projects to his cronies. He believed tomorrow's vote, which included his request for another $100 million, was a foregone conclusion. And I'm telling you, Mark, Julian boomed, sloshing his wine, the future is Astra, the old ways manufacturing logistics, that's dinosaur stuff. Right, Chloe? Absolutely, Julian. Chloe purred, placing a manicured hand on his forearm. It's about data. It's about agility. It's about not being afraid to break things to build something better. Arthur Pennington cleared his throat. Some of us believe, Miss Morgan, that the things you're so eager to break are the very foundations of this company's success. Prudence, fiscal responsibility. Oh, Prudence. Julian laughed, a braying, ugly sound. Arthur, you're a sweet old man, but your time has passed. This is a new era. He raised his glass. To the new era, to Astra, and to the woman who's making it all happen, Chloe Morgan. The table, save for Leora and Arthur, echoed the toast. It was a slap in the face. It was a public declaration. Leora felt the eyes of the other directors on her, flickering with pity, embarrassment, and a sick sort of curiosity. She kept her face serene, took a small sip of water, and placed her napkin on her lap. But Chloe wasn't done. Flushed with wine and victory, she leaned into Julian. Julian, darling, she said just loud enough for the table to hear. I was looking at the plans for the new executive offices. They're wonderful. But the chairman's lounge seems a bit dated. Dated? Julian frowned. Well, it's all dark wood and leather. So heavy. So old. And that ghastly portrait of your father. It's depressing. I was thinking something lighter. Glass, chrome, more. Me. Before Leora even realized she was speaking, the words were out. My father-in-law's portrait, Leora said, her voice clear and carrying in the sudden lull, is a 19th century masterpiece, and that lounge was designed to replicate the library at Yale, his alma mater. It's not dated, Miss Morgan. It's history, something you seem determined to erase. The silence that fell was absolute. Every eye turned to Leora. Chloe's face flushed an ugly, blotchy red. She looked to Julian, her eyes wide, demanding he defend her. Julian, who had been laughing a moment before, turned his head slowly to stare at his wife down the length of the table. His eyes were small and furious. "Leora," he said, his voice dangerously low. "What did you say?" "I said," Leora repeated, meeting his gaze, "that Miss Morgan is confusing history with dated. It's a common mistake for those with a limited perspective." "Oh," Chloe said, forcing a laugh. "I didn't mean... Mrs. Clare, I think you misunderstood." "I don't think I did," Leora said calmly. This was it, the breaking point. Julian saw his authority, challenged not by a business rival, but by his wife. In front of his mistress, in front of his board. He stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. "Leora, darling," he said, his voice dripping with venomous faux politeness. "You're embarrassing yourself. You're trying to talk about what art history business you—" He walked around the table until he was standing directly behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, a gesture that looked like an embrace, but was in reality a restraint. She could feel the heat of his anger. "Let's be clear, shall we?" he said to the table, but his words were for her. "My wife, Leora, she is the best in the world at certain things, aren't you, sweetheart?" Leora sat rigid, her back straight. "Julian, don't. She can plan a party that'll be on the cover of Vogue. She can tell you the difference between a Monet and a Manet. She can pick out China." He said the word like it was a disease that makes other women weep with envy. He squeezed her shoulders hard. "But when it comes to business, when it comes to the real world, she knows nothing. She's a spectator. A beautiful, wonderfully silent, passive spectator." He leaned down his lips by her ear. "You are a decoration, Leora," he whispered, so only she and Arthur could hear. Then he straightened up, addressing the room again. "So, Leora, darling, please, stick to what you're good at. Stick to the flowers and the seating charts. Leave the real thinking, the important decisions to people who actually work for a living. People who have a vision. People like Chloe." He let go of her shoulders and walked back to his seat, sitting down next to a triumphant, smirking Chloe. He picked up his wine glass. "Now, as I was saying, the $100 million..." The table was frozen. The other directors stared at their plates, their wine anywhere but at Leora. They were complicit in her humiliation. Arthur Pennington looked physically ill, his hand clenched into a white fist on the tablecloth. Leora sat there for a long, deafening 10 seconds. The blood roared in her ears. She felt the burning sting of tears, but she would not give him the satisfaction. She had been called a decoration, a spectator. Slowly, deliberately, she folded her napkin and placed it on the table. She stood up. Her movements were not hurried or angry. They were precise. She looked not at Julian, but at Chloe. "You're right about one thing. Ms. Morgan," Leora said, her voice steady. "The office is dated. It needs a complete overhaul, from the top down." She then turned not to her husband, but to Arthur. "Arthur, thank you for the lovely dinner, gentlemen." She didn't acknowledge Julian's existence. She turned and walked out of the restaurant. Her back was straight. Her head was high. She did not run. She did not look back. The moment the heavy doors closed behind her, Julian burst out laughing. Sea-sensitive. She can't handle a little bit of C-suite talk. Now Mark, about that new directorship you wanted." Arthur Pennington watched Julian, his face a mask of stone. "Julian," he said, his voice like gravel, "you are a fool." "What did you call me?" Julian snapped. "A fool," Arthur repeated, throwing his own napkin down. "And you, Ms. Morgan, are a thief, and the rest of you," he glared at the other directors, "are cowards." Arthur too stood up and walked out, leaving Julian and his circle of sycophants alone in the echoing, expensive silence. Leora did not go home. The Bentley was waiting, but she waved the driver off. "I'm going for a walk, Robert. I'll see myself home." She walked 3 blocks in the cold, clear November air, her thin silk dress doing nothing to stop the chill. The humiliation was a hot, physical weight in her chest. A decoration. Stick to the china. But as she walked, the heat of the shame began to cool, replaced by a glacial, diamond-hard resolve. He had done it. He had finally irrevocably done it. He hadn't just insulted her. He had given her the final piece of evidence she needed. She hailed a taxi, a yellow cab, not a black car. She didn't go to the Park Avenue penthouse. She gave an address in Tribeca, a discreet, modern building that faced the river. She used a key, not a code, to enter a sleek, minimalist apartment. Julian didn't know this place existed. Leora had bought it 2 years ago, under an LLC named Kensington Strategies, using money from her own family's trust. Julian thought she didn't work. In reality, this was her war room. There were no Vogue magazines here. The walls were lined with white boards. A 3-monitor trading desk sat in the corner. The coffee table was covered in shareholder reports and legal briefs. She kicked off her $1 $200 heels, made a cup of black tea, and sat at the desk. Her phone buzzed. It was Arthur. "Leora, my dear, are you all right?" What he did. What he said. It was unconscionable. "I'm fine, Arthur," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "In fact, I'm better than fine. Did he call you a sweet old man?" Yes, he did. "And he dismissed your concerns about prudence, and he called me a decoration. Leora, you don't need to." "I do, Arthur. I need this. I'm recording it." "What?" "I'm writing my notes, Arthur. For the meeting. The CEO publicly insulted a fellow director, Mr. Pennington, dismissing his valid fiduciary concerns as old. He then proceeded to verbally abuse and humiliate another director. That's me, in front of the entire board, stating she was a decoration and had no business in real thinking. That Arthur combined with his affair with a subordinate Ms. Morgan is the very definition of moral turpitude. It's the linchpin for Article 7. There was a stunned silence on the other end. "My God, Leora. You're using it." He handed it to me. "Arthur. On a silver platter. He's so arrogant, he can't see that humiliating me is a breach of fiduciary duty. I am a director. I am a shareholder. He didn't just insult his wife. He insulted a board member. He created a hostile environment. He exposed the company to a massive lawsuit. He did," Arthur said, the wheels turning in his brilliant 80-year-old legal mind. "He did." "Now," Leora said, pulling a file toward her. "The Sterling family is on board. That gives us 48%. I spent the last week talking to the institutional investors, T. Rowe Price and Vanguard. They're tired of Julian's vision. They're tired of him missing quarterly projections. They're just waiting for a viable alternative. I've given them one. They will vote with us. That gives us another 15%. We have 63%. We only need 2/3. 66.6%, Arthur breathed. "We're short, Leora. We're 3.6% short." "We were," Leora said, taking a sip of tea. "Until tonight. You see, Mark Jennings, Julian's golfing buddy, the one who wants a new directorship. Yes, he's been consulting for the Astra project too, through his wife's sister's catering company, for $1.5 million. I imagine he wouldn't want that information to get to the SEC, or to his wife. Blackmail, Arthur whispered, horrified. Leverage, Leora corrected. I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to present him with two options. Option A. He votes with us. The catering invoices are lost in the restructuring, and he quietly retires to Florida. Option B. He votes with Julian and I forward my findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office. His vote is 4%. We'll have 67%. Leora, Harrison always said you were ruthless. Harrison said I was smart, Leora said. Julian is the one who made me ruthless. So what now? Now you go home and get some sleep, Arthur. I'll see you at the meeting. 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. She hung up. She looked at the clock. 11:30 p.m. She had work to do. She pulled up the file on JCM Ventures. She pulled up the internal audits. She began to draft a 100-day plan. Phase 1. Stop the bleeding. Fire Chloe Morgan and her entire marketing team. Halt the Astra project. Initiate legal proceedings to claw back the $90 million from JCM. Phase 2. Restructure. Promote the COO David Chen, a brilliant man Julian hated to his old position. Reinvest in the manufacturing plants. Phase 3. Restore. Meet with the union. Refund the pension. She worked through the night. As the sun began to rise, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of grey and pink, Leora showered and got dressed. She did not choose a soft wife outfit. She did not choose a mournful black suit. She chose a bespoke dark navy blue power suit with sharp military-style shoulders. She pulled her hair back into a severe tight chignon. Her only jewelry was her simple wedding band and a pair of pearl earrings. She looked like a general. She took a taxi back to the penthouse, arriving at 7 a.m. Julian predictably was not there. He had no doubt spent the night at Chloe's. His bag, a small leather duffel, was in the foyer, clearly packed by his mistress. He was planning to come to the apartment change and go straight to the meeting. Leora picked up the duffel bag. She walked it to the service elevator. She handed it to the doorman. "Please make sure Mr. Clare gets this when he arrives," she said. Then she got into her own Bentley, the one she owned, and had Robert drive her to Clare Sterling Tower. She arrived at 8 a.m., an hour before the meeting. She let herself into the boardroom, the room where she had been humiliated. She walked to the head of the table. Julian's seat. She placed her single leather-bound briefcase on it. Then she walked to the portrait of Harrison Clare. "I'm here, Harrison," she whispered. "I'm scared, but I'm here. I'll protect it." The old man in the painting just stared back, his eyes seeming to hold a spark of approval. At 8:45 a.m., the boardroom began to fill. Arthur Pennington arrived first, giving Leora a single supportive nod. The Sterling family representatives from Boston, Thomas and his sister Eleanor, filed in. They didn't even look at Leora. They simply took their seats, their faces grim. The yes men trickled in, laughing and joking, still drunk on last night's wine. They saw Leora sitting not in her usual spot on the side, but in a chair adjacent to the head of the table. They raised their eyebrows. Mark Jennings, the compromised director, came in his face, pale and sweating. He saw Leora, and she gave him a look, a simple, flat, knowing look. He visibly flinched and hurried to his seat, avoiding her eye. At 8:58 a.m., Julian Clare burst in all confidence and cologne. He was in a fresh suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He was on top of the world. "Morning, everyone," he boomed. "Big day, big day." He saw Leora. He laughed. "Well, look who decided to show up." "Glad you could make it, darling. Took my little speech to heart, I see. Ready to watch how the big boys play." He didn't notice the icy silence in the room. He didn't notice the way Arthur and Thomas were watching him. "You're in my seat, Arthur," he said, gesturing to the head of the table where Arthur had sat. "No, Julian." "I'm not," Arthur said. "That seat," he pointed to the chair at the absolute head of the table, "is for the chairman, and I'm afraid that's the first order of business." "What?" Julian's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, the vote's not for an hour? First we have Chloe's final presentation." "Ms. Morgan will not be joining us," Arthur said, his voice ringing with new authority. Just then the doors opened again. Chloe Morgan tried to stride in, laptop in hand. She was stopped by two large security guards. "I'm sorry, Ms. Morgan," one of them said. "Your name is not on the access list." "What? That's ridiculous," she snapped. "Julian, tell them. What the hell is this?" "Arthur," Julian demanded, his face turning red. "This is my VP." "This is a closed board meeting." Leora said her first words since he'd entered. Her voice was like ice. "She is not a director. She is not an officer. She is a subordinate. And she is a conflict of interest. She will wait outside." "Leora, you don't—" "She will wait outside," Leora repeated, "or security will escort her from the building. Your choice." Julian looked at Leora. He saw the navy blue suit. He saw her eyes. He saw for the first time that the woman staring back at him was not his wife. She was a stranger, a very, very dangerous stranger. He faltered. "Chloe, just wait in my office. I'll clear this up. It's just Arthur being a procedural." Chloe, humiliated, shot a look of pure hatred at Leora and stormed off, flanked by security. Julian flustered, tried to regain control. Okay, a bit of drama. Now let's get on with it. The $100 million, let's just vote and—" "There will be no vote on the $100 million, Julian," Arthur said. He stood up. "The board, in accordance with the bylaws set forth by your father, Harrison Clare, has received a petition signed by 67% of the voting shareholders to invoke Article 7, Section 4. It took a second for the words to sink in. Julian looked confused. "Article 7, the failsafe clause. That's a joke. It's just some old text." "It is not a joke," Thomas Sterling's voice boomed. "It is the legal framework of this company, and we are invoking it. Now, this meeting is hereby a hearing to determine the fitness of the CEO, Julian Clare, on charges of gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and moral turpitude." Julian's world tilted. He looked around the table. The yes men were suddenly fascinated by their notes. Mark Jennings was pale green. This is you," he shrieked, pointing at Arthur. "You old senile. You're trying to stage a coup." "I'm not," Arthur said. "I'm just the administrator. The motion was not brought by me." "Then who?" Julian roared. Who would dare?" And Leora Clare stood up. She walked to the head of the table, to the chairman's seat. She placed her hands on the back of it. "I did," she said. The silence in the room was a living thing. It was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. Julian Clare stared at his wife, his mouth half open. His brain fogged by arrogance, and last night's wine simply could not compute what he was seeing. "You," he finally choked out, and it dissolved into a laugh. A high-pitched, hysterical laugh. "You, Leora, this isn't the gardening club. You're my wife. You can't do anything." Leora didn't flinch. She just looked at him with that same cold, clear gaze from the restaurant. "You're right, Julian. I am your wife, which means for 10 years I've had a front-row seat to your incompetence. But I'm also a director of this board, and I am a major shareholder. And today, I'm just that." She pulled a slim file from her briefcase and opened it. The motion to remove Julian Clare as CEO is based on the following, she said, her voice projecting to every corner of the room. 1 gross negligence, specifically the Astra project. You were advised by our internal risk assessment team and by Mr. Pennington that the platform was non-compliant with federal data privacy laws. You pushed it through anyway. When it failed, you and Ms. Morgan concealed the losses. That's a lie, Julian shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Is it? Leora slid a document down the polished wood. This is the internal audit from 6 months ago, marked read by you. And here, she slid another is the subsequent memo from Ms. Morgan, classifying the losses as R&D expenditure. A $90 million R&D expenditure. That's not negligence, Julian. That's fraud, she continued. 2 breach of fiduciary duty. You have been actively siphoning company funds into a private external LLC, JCM Ventures, an LLC owned in equal shares by you and by Chloe Morgan. The yes men gasped. Over the last 18 months, Leora continued, her voice a relentless, steady monotone. You and Ms. Morgan have approved $14.3 million in consulting fees to this shell corporation for services that were never rendered. That's creative accounting, Julian stammered, his face ashen. That's embezzlement, Thomas Sterling roared. And finally, Leora said, 3 moral turpitude, as defined by the bylaws, behavior that brings the company into disrepute. Last night at a dinner with the board, you publicly humiliated a fellow director, Mr. Pennington, dismissing his valid concerns. You then proceeded to verbally abuse another director. She paused, letting the words hang. In a public forum. You have engaged in an improper relationship with a subordinate Ms. Morgan and used company funds to enrich her, creating a hostile and toxic work environment. You, Julian, are a liability this company can no longer afford. Julian was broken. He sank into his chair. You can't prove any of this. I can, Leora said. She nodded to the door. The company's general counsel, Sarah Hayes, walked in, followed by 2 men from Deloitte, the company's external auditing firm. We have the wire transfers, Julian. Sarah said, her voice all business. We have the server logs. We have the LLC incorporation papers. We have everything. Leora, Mrs. Clare, has been working with my office and our external auditors for 6 months. Julian looked at Leora. The hatred in his eyes was pure. You bitch! You were planning this. All this time. The parties, the smiles. You were planning this. You called me a decoration, Leora said. It was the perfect camouflage. You never looked too closely at the furniture. You just expect it to be there. Well, the furniture is tired of being sat on. Arthur Pennington cleared his throat. We have a motion on the floor to remove Julian Clare from the office of CEO and from his seat on this board, effective immediately. All in favor. Every hand went up. Even Mark Jennings, who looked like he was going to be sick, raised his eyes darting to Leora. The motion passes, Arthur said, his voice heavy with sadness and relief. Unanimously. Julian was hyperventilating. You can't, this is my father's company. You can't. Who's going to run it? You, Arthur, you're half dead. That, Arthur said, brings us to the second item. The bylaws require the board to immediately appoint a successor. The shareholder group has put forward a nominee. Who? Julian snarled. That idiot, David Chen. No, Arthur said. He looked at Leora, and for the first time he smiled. The board, by a majority shareholder, vote of 67% hereby appoints Mrs. Leora Kensington Clare as the new chairwoman and chief executive officer of Clare Sterling Industries. The sound Julian made was not human. It was a strangled, agonizing howl of disbelief. CEO, he looked at Leora, the mousy wife, the party planner, the china picker. She was standing at the head of the table. She was looking at him, and she was not smiling. Security. Leora said, her voice quiet but absolute. The two guards who had blocked Chloe entered the room. Mr. Clare, Julian, is no longer an employee of this company. He is trespassing. Please escort him from the building. He is to take nothing but his personal effects. His access is revoked. Leora, you can't. Julian lunged, not at her, but at the table. This is mine. You can't take this from me. The guards grabbed him. He fought, but it was pathetic. He was a soft man, and they were professionals. You'll regret this, he screamed as they dragged him toward the door. You'll run this company into the ground. You don't know anything. You're nothing without me. At the door he stopped, and his face changed. The rage was replaced by a sudden, desperate plea. Leora, please, it's me. I'm your husband. Leora just looked at him. My lawyers, she said, will be in touch with your lawyers. Get him out. They dragged him out. The boardroom door slammed shut, echoing the finality of a coffin lid. The room was silent. The remaining directors stared at Leora. She stood at the head of the table, in her rightful place. She looked at the portrait of Harrison, then back at her new board. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Leora Clare said, pulling her chair out. We have a lot of work to do. Sarah, I want cease and desist letters sent to JCM Ventures and a motion filed in Delaware to freeze their assets. Arthur, I want to call an all-hands meeting for 3 p.m. David Chen is now COO. Thomas, get your family's auditors on a plane. I want a full independent review of the last 5 years. We are going to find every dollar Julian and Chloe stole. She sat down. Our first order of business, she said, opening her 100-day plan, is saving this company. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The business journals called it the Clare Sterling coup. Julian Clare, in a fit of spite, had leaked the story to the Wall Street Journal painting Leora as a vengeful, scorned wife in a palace intrigue. He expected the stock to plummet. He expected the board to panic and reinstate him. He miscalculated. Leora didn't hide. She didn't release a tearful statement. She held a press conference. She walked to the podium, not as a wife, but as a CEO. She was flanked by her new, no-nonsense COO, David Chen, and her general counsel, Sarah Hayes. A reporter from Bloomberg asked the first question. Mrs. Clare, your husband alleges this is a hostile takeover, motivated by a marital dispute. Is that true? Leora looked into the camera, her gaze unblinking. My husband's personal feelings are a matter for his therapist. My actions were motivated by one thing, my fiduciary duty to our shareholders. For 18 months, Mr. Clare and his associate, Ms. Morgan, were engaged in systematic criminal fraud. She nodded to Sarah Hayes. This morning, Sarah said, my office filed a 30-page civil complaint against Mr. Clare and Ms. Morgan, seeking the recovery of $108 million in embezzled and misallocated funds. We have also turned over our findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, who will be pursuing criminal charges. The press room exploded. Ms. Clare, another reporter shouted, you have no executive experience. Wall Street is betting you'll fail by Christmas. What's your response? Wall Street is welcome to bet against me, Leora said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. They'll lose. I may not have been a CEO, but I have been auditing this company's books from my hobby room for the last 5 years. I know where every dollar is. I know where the rot is, and I'm here to cut it out. She held up her 100-day plan. Effective immediately, the Astra project is terminated. The $100 million Julian Clare was seeking will be reallocated. Half will go to recapitalizing the employee pension fund he nearly bankrupted. The other half will be invested in our core manufacturing plants in Ohio and Michigan, securing 5,000 jobs. She leaned into the microphone. Claire Sterling Industries is not a tech startup. We are not a vanity project. We are a 100-year-old American institution, and as long as I am CEO, we will start acting like it again. The stock, which had dipped 15% at the open, stabilized, and then it began to climb. The days that followed were a blur. Leora worked 18-hour days. She was not a natural CEO. She was a working one. She wasn't charismatic like Julian. She was precise. She didn't inspire with speeches. She inspired with competence. She walked the factory floors. She learned the names of the shift supervisors. She ate in the company cafeteria. She fired the entire executive floor of Julian's cronies and promoted from within, finding a wealth of talent that Julian had overlooked. 3 months later, she was in her office, Harrison's office, which she'd had restored to its original oak and leather glory. The hideous glass and chrome furniture Chloe had ordered was summarily rejected. Harrison's portrait was back in its rightful place. There was a knock on her door. It was Arthur. "Leora," he said, holding a newspaper. "You've done it." The headline in the journal read, "The Iron Lady of Park Avenue, How Leora Claire Saved Claire Sterling." The story detailed her aggressive restructuring, the stabilizing stock price, and the restoration of the pension. "We're not done yet, Arthur," Leora said, not looking up from a balance sheet. "We're just getting started." "Well," Arthur smiled, "perhaps this will help. The U.S. Attorney's Office just handed down their indictments. Julian and Chloe, they're facing 20 years. They're both pleading guilty in exchange for lesser sentences. He's lost everything. The company, his reputation, your divorce papers were the final nail." Leora finally looked up. Her face was sad, but not for him. "He didn't lose it, Arthur," she said quietly. "He threw it away. He had every advantage, every privilege, and he threw it all away for, what greed ego? A 28-year-old with a marketing degree. It's over, Leora," Arthur said gently. "No," Leora said, standing up and walking to the great window overlooking the city. "It's just beginning." She was no longer Leora Claire, the wife. She was Miss Kensington, the CEO. She had not set out to take his company. She had set out to save her father-in-law's legacy. In the process, she had saved herself. She looked at her reflection in the glass. The decoration was gone. In her place stood a woman of steel chrome and an unshakable vision. She was in every sense of the word, the chairwoman. The story of Leora Claire isn't just about revenge, it's about value. It's a powerful real-life reminder that the people you underestimate are often the ones you should fear the most. Julian Clare saw his wife as a decoration, but he forgot that the most beautiful polished surfaces can also be the hardest. He saw a party planner, not a strategist. He saw a wife, not a CEO. And that mistake cost him everything. This story is a testament to every person who has ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told to stick to what you're good at. The quietest person in the room isn't a spectator. They're an observer. And they are always, always taking notes. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of hidden strength, then please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own value. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more gripping real-life stories. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a single update.